You are listening to This Week in Palestine, Truth and Justice Radio, WZBC Boston College. Today is Sunday, July 19th, 2026. Before we step into this hour, a brief reminder for our listeners. The reflections you hear today rise from the voices of our hosts and guests alone. They are shaped by their experiences, their convictions, and their search for truth. They do not represent the official views of WZBC, Boston College, or its Board of Trustees. What you hear in this space is unfiltered. What you hear in this space is honest. What you hear in this space belongs to the people who speak it. And now, with that clarity set before us, we begin. This Week in Palestine is not a place where truth tiptoes. It does not wait at the doorway or ask permission to enter. Here, truth walks in with its shoulders squared, its voice steady, its presence undeniable. Urgency is not an accessory in this space. It is the pulse that drives every word, every story, every breath we take behind this microphone. Clarity is not a choice. It is the duty we accept the moment we speak to you. And while our heart beats in Palestine, in the alleys of Jerusalem, in the camps of the West Bank, in the shattered streets of Gaza, our sight reaches far beyond the borders drawn by occupation or diplomacy. Because the forces shaping Palestinian life do not stop at walls or wire. They move through parliaments, through boardrooms, through the quiet corridors where powerful hands make decisions that ordinary people must live with. Wherever you are listening now, steering through the long, dark hours of your shift, lifting your first cup of coffee into the morning air, or sitting in the stillness of your home, thank you for choosing to be here. I am your host and narrator, Arlene Russell. In this space, we do not sand down the truth to make it easier to swallow. We do not bend the story to comfort those who prefer silence. We do not dilute reality for the sake of anyone's convenience. Here, truth stands unfiltered. Resistance is not theory. It is breath. It is survival. Solidarity is not a slogan. It is a lineage carried from one generation to the next. The voices rising from occupied land do not waver. They rise alongside movements across the world that demand dignity, justice, and liberation. They remind us that struggle is never solitary. It is woven across borders, across histories, across the lives of people who refuse to surrender their humanity. This hour is not just a broadcast. It is a lifeline, a thread stretching from Palestine to every corner of the globe, binding devastation to determination, binding grief to a future still worth reaching for. Even in the deepest darkness, the spark of defiance endures. Even when the world turns away, that spark refuses to die. Each week, we bring you reporting that cuts through distortion, analysis that refuses disguise, and reflections that center Palestinian life in all its depth, complexity, and unbroken courage. We speak with intention because the stakes demand nothing less. This Week in Palestine is not a refuge for polite silence. It is testimony. It is urgency. It is solidarity without hesitation. The struggle for freedom is shared, it crosses borders, and it remains sacred. We in America have so many allies, yet somehow we abandon the good ones and cling to the worst. We turn our backs on nations that stood with us, and we embrace those who have harmed us again and again. For generations, Israel has spied on us, stolen technology, and even killed American servicemen, like the tragedy of the USS Liberty. and still we blindly send them billions of dollars, while the average American can't afford health care or education for their children. This is the American paradox: loyalty to those who betray us, neglect of those who need us. Today, with the help of Tucker Carlson, we bring you a witness who lived through one of the darkest chapters in U.S.-Israel relations, a survivor of the USS Liberty attack, a man who saw the bombs fall, who heard the screams, who watched his fellow sailors die, a man who has carried the truth for decades, while politicians buried it under excuses and diplomatic silence. He reveals what really happened the day Israel attacked an American ship in international waters. He exposes the lies that followed, the cover-ups that protected the guilty, and the pressure placed on survivors to stay quiet. This interview is not comfortable. It is not easy to hear. It is not the kind of story America likes to confront. But it is necessary, because the truth of the USS Liberty is part of a larger pattern. A pattern of blind support, ignored warnings, and forgotten victims. A pattern that continues today as billions leave American pockets while families struggle to buy groceries or fill their tanks with gas. A pattern that raises one question: how long will we keep paying for alliances that harm us? And now, together, let's listen to the man who survived the day America was betrayed at sea. USS Liberty survivor reveals what really happened the day Israel attacked and the lies covering it up. Let's listen together.
Mr. Lockwood, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Tell us, the USS Liberty, many people have heard the name. They're aware there's a controversy about what happened to the ship in 1967. If you wouldn't mind starting at the beginning and telling us the story of the USS Liberty.
USS Liberty was a spy ship back in the 1960s. Several of the sub-Saharan African countries had just won their independence from Great Britain, Germany, Belgium, France. There was a heavy influence both from the Soviet Union and from Cuba. Cubans had a lot of troops around the area. That entire area is very wealthy in natural resources, precious metals. And the United States wanted to keep track of what was going on over there. Mind you, this is when satellites were pretty rudimentary. So the best way to gather that information is to get close. The USS Liberty was a World War II Victory-class freighter. She was originally commissioned as the SS Simmons Victory. She saw service as a cargo carrier during the Second World War, mothballed, brought back out of mothballs for the Korean War, ammunition carrier for the Korean War, back into mothballs. And in 1965, when the National Security Agency decided they needed vessels of that type, her hull was probably in the best condition of almost any of them that were in the ghost fleet or the mothball fleet. She was brought out of commission. The U.S. government spent $26 million in 1965 money, equipping her with the latest in intelligence collection. We could suck up literally every frequency that was being used. We had aboard her the world's largest mobile computer, the UNIVAC 500. At that time, the world's largest. You could likely do about as much with your cell phone now. But technology has come a long ways in the last 60 years. She was equipped with linguists, cruised up and down the west coast of Africa, listening in onto whatever was going on. As war appeared to be imminent between Israel and her neighbors in 1967, the neighbors included what was then called the United Arab Republic, primarily Egypt, Syria to a lesser extent, some influence from Jordan and Libya. The administration set some F-4 photograph planes, high performance photo intelligence planes, to a Tyrone Air Base in Spain. Those markings were obliterated. The pilots were given neutral uniforms and neutral identification and set to overfly Israel's neighbors. When hostilities broke out, June of 1967, the Israelis had intelligence courtesy of the U.S. administration, locating every aircraft, revetment, every tank, location of personnel, where they were riveted, where they were based, and so forth. Hostilities broke out on the 5th of June, 1967. The National Security Agency had ordered the USS Liberty proceed from her cruise up and down the west coast of Africa with all due speed to Rota, Spain, take on stores, refuel, pick up 6 additional linguists, and proceed with haste to the Eastern Mediterranean where they could monitor what was going on. She was stacked with linguists. Out of a crew of 294 aboard the ship, roughly 190 were intelligence personnel, linguists, code breakers, manual Morse operators, voice intercept operators, so forth. The Soviets had a group of Tu-95 long-range bombers equipped for intelligence collection. At Alexandria, Egypt, they told the world that they'd given those planes to Egypt and that they were manned by Egyptian troops. Such was not the case. They were Soviet troops wearing Egyptian uniforms. The task that we were given as linguists, there were 3 of us Russian linguists aboard her. We had 3 watch sections rotating 8 hours each. The 3 of us Russian linguists that were assigned as voice intercept section supervisors, our primary task was catching those Soviet Tu-95 intelligence aircraft at Alexandria. The aircraft would communicate in plain language Egyptian until they were airborne and over the Mediterranean Sea, change frequencies and go to plain language Russian. It was ironic that while we were under attack, my relief came into the processing and reporting room where I was and said, "Hey, Sarge, I got him. I said, "You got who, Jim?" "The Ruskies." "Really?" He said, "Yeah, plain language Russian." He went back into the room where he was copying the intercept, and torpedo struck him, killed him. Hostilities broke out on the 5th of June, 1967. We arrived on station on the 7th of June. Throughout the day of the 7th and in the early morning hours of the 8th of June, we were overflown by several different Israeli aircraft. They flew very close to us. We could plainly see the pilots. Fellows that were off duty and sunning themselves on the decks would wave to the pilots. The pilots waved back. We had a drill general quarters at noon on the morning of the 8th. The captain came on the address system aboard the ship, the 1MC, and told us that there were a few things he wanted us to improve, get to our general quarter stations a little more rapidly, get the watertight doors closed a little more rapidly, secured from the general quarters. I was at my berthing spaces in the after part of the ship. I heard a tremendous noise, roughly 2:00 local time. I had never been under hostile fire before, but I knew that we were in trouble. Immediately dropped what I was doing, headed for my general quarters station, which is below decks. Mind you, the cargo spaces in the forward part of the ship was where all of our intelligence people were, roughly 190 men. The only way out was a narrow, steep ladderway about 2 feet wide with a railing. The ship would ring whenever a projectile struck it. There were 826 large caliber strikes from aircraft aboard her. 40 millimeter cannon fire, 30 millimeter cannon fire, heat-seeking rockets, napalm. On either side of the ship, port or starboard, there were racks that contained life rafts with a charge. You jerk on a cord and the charge would go off and fire these life rafts into the sea. Both of those were napalm. The captain's gig was riddled with rocket fire. The Liberty launch was riddled with rocket fire. Basically, no means of getting any survivors off. The Israelis were jamming our distress frequencies, which was a violation of international law. They were using unmarked aircraft, which is a violation of international law. During the court of inquiry, which was conducted after the attack was over with, ordered by the Johnson administration, conducted by three-star Admiral Isaac Kidd, the Israelis said that they had mistaken us for an Egyptian ship, the El Qasir. The El Qasir was a World War I horse transport. Her only armament was a 4-inch muzzle-loading cannon. The Israelis claimed that they were being shelled from the sea. We were the only ship in the vicinity. We had no capacity of shelling anything. The bottom line was the Israelis had captured an entire Egyptian brigade. They were blowing up the captured ammunition, and that's what the explosions were that they claimed was fire from the sea. Quite obviously, that was not possible from the El Qasir or from us.
What can you do to monitor important parts of your life that you can't always keep your eyes on? Things like the far corners of a job site or ranch, or let's say you've got a boat dock somewhere and you can't check on it every day. Cellular security cameras from Defend are the answer. These cameras are very easy to install. No Wi-Fi required, no complex setup process. You don't need to be a master electrician to do it. No running wires all over the place. You just mount the camera, turn it on, and it automatically connects to the strongest available cellular signal and starts sending photos and videos directly to your phone. You can be across the country. You never have to wonder what is happening where you live. You've got total security all the time. It's a gate entrance, a construction site, it's your barn, cabin, anything else you need to keep your eye on when you're gone. This will do it for you. And unlike a lot of security systems, this is affordable. Peace of mind for an honest price. DefendCellCam.com is the address. Go there, see for yourself. DefendCellCam.com. If you've got a signal, you've got 24-hour security.
Let me ask you. When you come under fire around 2:00, how long does it last?
There are various testimonies about that. The claimed air attack lasted about 25 minutes. But of course, when you're under fire and trying to survive, it seems a lot longer. And as I mentioned earlier, the entire ship would ring with each shell that struck her. The captain came on the 1MC and said, brace yourselves, torpedo attack, starboard side. Well, that's where I was located. My friend Ronnie Campbell was sitting there at a desk, and he said, well, they hit us with everything else. What else can they hit us with? The division officer, Lieutenant Bennett, stuck his head in the hatchway and he said, Sergeant Locke, would you come here a minute, please? I stepped out into the passageway. I ran down the center of the ship, and he got me in a conversation with Lieutenant Commander David Lewis, who was a senior research officer aboard the ship, about getting these ditching bags topside pitched over in the sea. We had large canvas bags, brass furls in the sides, lead weight in the bottom. The idea was all the classified information that we had, get them into these ditching bags, get them topside, pitch into the sea. Should they be recovered by the time they could be, any information in them would be useless. When there was a sudden blinding flash of flame, tremendous loud noise, knocked me to the deck. I was kind of semi-conscious. I'm thinking to myself, well, Lord, I guess this is it. I guess I'm coming home. At least Lois and the kids are taken care of. Lois is alive. I felt something cold I looked down and the water was gushing in. I didn't find out what had actually taken place so many years later. Some of the sailors told me that when the torpedo struck, it literally lifted the ship out of the water and set her back down. When she came down and rolled towards the starboard side, there was a roughly 40-foot hole in the side. That water was gushing in. I heard a moan behind me, struggling my feet. There was a sailor trapped there in the wreckage. His name was Joe Lentini. I didn't know who that was until 25 years later. Joe was one of the communicators that worked with the teletype equipment. We weren't getting anything out. Couldn't understand why we weren't getting a mayday out and weren't getting any aid. And a piece of shrapnel from a rocket had penetrated the ship and struck him in the left thigh. Joe was bleeding profusely. He sat down on the deck and leaned up against the ladderway, the only way out. I was putting a tourniquet on that wound when the torpedo struck. Our office spaces were separated by sheet steel bulkheads. That bulkhead just mushroomed out, caught him in his left knee upturned, and literally made toothpicks out of his femur bone. And I'm trying to pull him loose. The water was coming up pretty rapidly. And I said, come on, you got to help me. I can't do it by myself. Come on, get your legs on you and push. Well, I didn't realize his left leg was smashed. But I felt him get his right leg under me, pushed just enough where I could free him, though he was still partially tangled up in that wreckage. By that time, the water was within 1.5 feet of the overhead. There were some pipes that carried cabling and power and so forth that was hanging from the overhead. I said, here, get a hold of these pipes. About that time, I saw a body floating out towards a hole. I reached down with my right arm and got an arm around him, trying to hold his head above water. I heard the division officer, Lieutenant Bennett, at the top of the ladderway say, this is Mr. Bennett, open this hatch. There was a lot of confusion. You can imagine roughly 190 people crammed into that space in fear of their lives. A lot of shouting. I hollered as loudly as I could, knock it off. If y'all will settle down, none of us will get out here alive. That was the last thing I remember. I apparently passed out. The next thing I recall was being alone with the unconscious sailor and nobody there but me and the sea and him. The ship was rolling. The torpedo had ruptured one of the fuel tanks, which is there on the starboard side. That was the heavy oil that powered the ship. It's a stinking oil. That oil was everywhere. And oil water don't mix. Of course, you can imagine just about everything was coated with it. I tried to start up the ladderway with this unconscious sailor, slipped, dropped him. He's going back out the hole. Wait, got him, got back, started back up the ladderway. About half or 2/3 of the way up the ladderway, a piece of shrapnel from the torpedo had bent in the railing, so there's only a space, roughly 1 foot wide. Got to that point, slipped, dropped him again, going back out the hole, and that got him back up the ladderway again, got up to the top, and the hatch was sealed shut. Trying to hold his head above water, pound on the hatch, and a sailor named Bobby Schnell, there were dogs that held the hatch sealer shut around a rubber gasket and about a 8-inch high metal seal. Oh, I'm guessing probably a dozen large bolts that bolted it down. He got a wrench, knocked those nuts loose, and opened the hatch, let me out. I tried to drag his sailor out, dropped him, tried to drag him again, can't quite get him out, tried to turn him over. His foot caught in the chain that was holding the prop for the hatch open. And literally, I was trying to drag his leg off. Phil Turney was one of the damage control people who was standing there. He said, wait a minute, he got his foot caught. He freed his foot. He said the captain of his order to prepare to abandon ship. He said, you need to get a life vest on. There's been there to have a life vest. And I said, get a life vest on, put one on him. And they're doing triage at the mess decks and the after part of the ship. Said, you need to get him back there, triage on. I tried to pick him up, pretty weak, dropped him, tried to pick him up again, dropped him again. Years later, when I found out who he was, it was some 30 years before I even found out who he was. We were sitting in his kitchen Sunday morning in Chicago, and his family is gathered around and want to know what had happened to Dad. I'm trying to tell him, and his name was Dave McFagan, and he kind of blurted out, said, I wouldn't be hurt nearly as bad. You want to drop me so many times. He had been topside in a rocket from one of the air attacks that exploded very close to him and flying him back into the bulkhead. He's wounded from that. He's in a lot of pain. He's thinking, I've got to get to my GQ station. His GQ station was down below decks. He gets down there just as they slam the hatch shut and bolt it down. He's sitting on the ladderway with his head in his hands, hurting badly when the torpedo struck. Slammed him back into the ladderway and made a mess out of his spine. He's still alive, but barely, and confined to a wheelchair now. Joe Lentini passed away from a heart attack some 3 years ago. The book Assault on the Liberty credits me with diving underwater and freeing Joe Lentini's leg. That was actually a sailor named Bobby Schnell that did that. Freed his leg, carried him topside. There's some conversation that I carried a man out, went back down. Senior enlisted man, Stan White, said, Sarge, you can't go back down there. Stan has since passed away too, but he told me, he said, you gave me a kind of a blank stare and went back down. I don't recall any of that. I think there's a good possibility I was confused with someone else, but the Navy Marine Corps uniform is a different color. We were told to go to the radio room on the port side of the ship. I was lying on the deck in the radio room, and I couldn't understand why we weren't getting any aid. There was machine gunning going on. The motor torpedo boats were circling the ship, riddling us with heavy machine gun fire. There were 3,100 heavy caliber machine gun strikes on the ship. One of the radiomen figured out that when they were shooting rockets at us, they couldn't jam our distress frequencies because the jamming would screw up the flight of the rockets. In a brief period when those rockets were being fired, this mayday went out. Firefox, this is Rockstar. Under attack by unidentified surface and air units require immediate assistance. As soon as that mayday was acknowledged, the shooting stopped. I saw some sailors carry 3 inflatable life rafts through the radio room, heard them fall into the sea. There were lines attached to keep them from floating away. I heard a revving of engines, more machine gun fire. One of those sailors came back through the radio room and he said, I don't know what we're going to do now. They've riddled what we had left. It is my understanding that that machine gun fire severed the line that was holding one of those life rafts. The torpedo boat came in, picked it up, plainly labeled U.S. Navy. Can't be proven. I'd have no idea, but I heard a rumor that life raft and the ship's wheel from the torpedo boat that fired the fatal torpedo are in the Israeli Naval War Museum at Haifa as trophies of war.
America is exceptional because in this country we know that our rights come from God, not the government. Yet every day abortion denies unborn babies the most important fundamental right of all, the right to be alive. Preborn exists to give struggling expectant mothers an option to abortion. Preborn Network clinics welcome women with surprise pregnancies. They welcome them with compassion and support and a free ultrasound, because when a mother sees her baby and hears his heartbeat for the first time, she becomes twice as likely to choose life because she understands what the choice is about. These babies are the future. They'll grow up into parents and teachers and pastors and entrepreneurs and moms and leaders. They won't if they're killed. Preborn's ultrasounds make a huge difference. Just $28 provides one life-saving ultrasound. In honor of America's 250th birthday, a special gift of $250 will save even more children. To help today, dial pound 250, say the keyword baby, or give securely at preborn.com/Tucker. That's preborn.com/Tucker. All gifts are tax deductible. So did at any point did the torpedo boats come to the aid of survivors? What did, when the Israelis stopped firing on the Liberty after your Mayday call was received, did they help in any way, the survivors?
Actually, we heard some helicopters overhead. I did not see them myself, but the deck crew told me that two large armored helicopters came over, fully loaded with armed troops, automatic weapons, hand grenades. It seems fairly obvious. The idea was sink the ship, kill everyone aboard it, no survivors. We think there's a very good possibility that we were set up by our own government. The president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, was very friendly towards Israel. His predecessor, John F. Kennedy, had actually given a speech about the necessity for discourse between the Palestinians and Israelis about getting some 700,000 refugees from the so-called War of Independence of Israel, 1947-48. They were driven from their homes. The Israelis said they were voluntarily left. My personal opinion is there was nothing voluntary about it. They were told to leave or be destroyed. The Kennedy conversation was to have at least a portion of those refugees be allowed to return to their ancestral homes. As a result of our Congress and our president doing nothing about the attack on the USS Liberty, the Court of Inquiry accepted the Israelis' excuse that it was a case of mistaken identity. Case was closed. As a result of our doing nothing, Israel realized they could do whatever they wanted. The United States Congress, the United States administration would say nothing, do nothing.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Why? I just want to go back to what you said about your belief that the Johnson administration knew that this attack was coming on the Liberty. Why do you think they would have allowed that?
Commander Lewis, who was a senior intelligence officer aboard the ship, and I both had pretty much the same wounds. My glasses protected my face from debris. His eyes were sealed shut. We were both medevaced off to the carrier America. Admiral Lawrence Larry Geist, who was the Task Force 6 commanding officer, that included the carriers USS Saratoga, USS America, and the guided missile cruiser, the USS Little Rock, asked for Commander Lewis to come to his stateroom. This is several days after the attack had taken place. He swore Mr. Lewis to secrecy until after his death, told him that he had ordered aircraft to come to our aid. Planes were launched from the USS Saratoga. They had nuclear weapons aboard them. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara ordered them returned. Both Admiral Geist and skipper of the Saratoga, Captain Joseph Tully, figured out that was probably because there were nuclear weapons aboard them. They were recovered. Conventional aircraft with conventional weapons were relaunched to come to our aid. Captain Tully re-notified Washington. Secretary of Defense McNamara came on the circuit again and ordered those aircraft returned. Admiral Geist said, I want to exercise my authority and hear that from higher authority. Well, the only higher authority was the president. This is the conversation that was related to David Lewis from Admiral Geis. The president said, "Get those aircraft back. I will not have my allies embarrassed." They were using unmarked aircraft, and we did not know who was attacking us. How did the president know? The number 2 man in the U.S. CIA at the time was a gentleman named James Angleton. James Angleton was not only the number 2 man in the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, he was a double agent, which is really Mossad. Many of us survivors believe that we were set up by our own government. False flag operation. Sink the ship. No survivors. Blame it on Egypt. Get the United States involved on the side of Israel against her neighbors. And excuse me, Tucker, what's happening now?
The head of counterintelligence that you mentioned, James Jesus Angleton, was also clearly involved in the Kennedy assassination, the beneficiary of which was, of course, Lyndon Johnson and Israel. That's
beyond my comprehension, Tucker.
Yeah,
I don't doubt that.
Well, it's pretty clear, I think, from documents that have subsequently been released. So, how many, just to wrap up the story of what actually happened that day, how many Americans were killed in the attack?
There were 34 Americans killed. 1 civilian, Alan Blue. He was a Arabic linguist from National Security Agency. The other 2 Marines were both killed. Sergeant Jack Raper, Corporal Ed Raymeyer. They were both Arabic linguists. And the balance of the 31 were all sailors. They were all linguists, manual Morse intercept operators. 34 killed. There were 208 Purple Hearts awarded, 174 wounded. Several of the crewmen that were wounded were never awarded Purple Hearts. Jack Beatty, he was a machinist mate who was working on he was changing oil on the Liberty launch, the enlisted launch. When the air attack took place, he had shrapnel on the back of his head. He didn't find out about too many years later when Veterans Administration performed an X-ray on his skull. There was another Navy chief, Joe, last name slips my mind right now. He had one of those heavy caliber strikes in his left calf. He was a Boy Scout instructor, knew first aid, took that projectile out of his leg himself, wrapped himself up. He was never awarded a Purple Heart. There were others.
Cost of living is already making it hard to live here, and it's not getting any better. Unfortunately, it's likely to get worse, and a lot of Americans fill the gap with credit cards, not just for fancy dinners, but to cover things like groceries and bills. That is a disaster. It's understandable, but don't go down that road because there is a tax, in effect, a survival tax of 20% interest or more. Why would you do that? Why would you hand money to the big banks when you could keep it for your family? Our friends at American Financing have a better way. If you're looking to buy your first home or refinance your current one, they're helping Americans achieve the dream of homeownership with monthly mortgage rates currently in the 5s. American Financing saves its customers an average of $800 per month. That's nearly $10,000 every year back to you. This isn't just a loan, it's a total financial reset. So debt is tough, but there's a smart way to do it and a reckless, self-destructive way to do it, credit cards. And so we recommend American Financing. They're salary-based, not commission-based, which means they actually work for you, not the banks. They're called America's home for home loans for a reason. Call 800-685-5696, 800-685-5696, or visit americanfinancing.net/Tucker. When did you find out it was the Israelis who'd attacked the ship?
Not until the next morning in my own recollection. The aircraft were all unmarked. The torpedo boats were flying the Star of David. One of the officers that was on the deck happened to be Jewish. When he saw the Star of David flag, I understand he broke out in tears.
The torpedo boats that fired machine guns at the Liberty, I mean, they must have been close enough to see the American flag flying over the ship.
Yes. Our initial flag was flying from Flagstaff at the back of the main mast. That was knocked down in one of the first air attacks. Our signalman ran that back up again. It was knocked down again. And then he ran up the holiday flag, which is 5 feet by 8 feet. It's the largest flag we had aboard ship. That flag was literally riddled with shrapnel. He ran that up on the one of the port signal arms, which is on the port side. But we had a good breeze blowing that day. The flag was out there, pretty obvious. Egyptian ships are painted black with hull markings in Arabic script. Every highway sign in Israel is in Hebrew, Arabic script, and English lettering. So that excuse falls away. U.S. ships are painted gray with hull markings in English lettering. Our hull marking was GTR 5, which stands for General Technical Research, the fifth and newest of her class. Technical research means that she's a non-combatant. It's a violation of international law to fire on non-combatants. The Israelis were riddling our life rafts with machine gun fire. That's a violation of international law. The irony of that is that came about as a result of refugee ships being machine gunned by Nazi wolf packs during World War II.
What did your commanding officers tell you about the motive for this attack? So you're lying, recovering, you've got wounds to your face and your hands, and someone at some point explains to you why this happened. What did that person say?
Honestly, I didn't hear anything. Years later, when I reconnected with some of the crew, and it was well over 20 years later before I reconnected with any of the crew, I say it was 1982 before I reconnected with any of the crew. So this is 15 years afterwards. I honestly didn't know. Most of us were pro-Israel that were aboard the ship. It's kind of ironic that one of our analysts, he was processing the United Arab Republic traffic that we were getting. He made a small UAR flag and had that stuck in his outbasket. Most of the crew were smoking back then. They'd walk by and say, "Hey, Rich, your Arabs aren't doing so well." And they'd set fire to his flag. And he'd say, "No, cut that out, put it out." One of the sailors had made a huge Star David out of teletype paper that was pasted up on the starboard bulkhead. That Israeli torpedo struck within a few feet of that Star David flag.
Did you talk about this after? Did you do interviews with the media? Did you tell your friends, your family? Like, how did you respond to this once you recovered?
My situation was a little different. I was on temporary assignment from my home base in Bremerhaven, Germany. It was 10 days aboard the carrier America, flown back to Lucca, Malta, where the ship was dry docked. I was one more day aboard her there. This kind of ironic. I didn't have a place to sleep, and one of the sailors said, "I'll go up to sickbay and talk to Dr. Van Lane." Said, "He'll find you a place to sleep up there." We're kind of chatting. It was getting long, late in the afternoon, and he said, "You're welcome." There were 3 bunks there. He said, "You're welcome to sleep in whichever one you want." I said, "I hope that doesn't get to stinking midnight." He said, "What's that, Tom?" There was a box in the corner, roughly 18 inches square. It was labeled unidentified human body parts. That's what's buried in the mass grave in Arlington National Cemetery. And I slept with it that night.
Ugh.
Two of the men that worked for me were in that box. What was left of that?
Were you told by the U.S. military, by the Marine Corps, by the Navy, not to talk about this?
Well, mind you, we're in intelligence business saying just don't talk about it. There's an old saying,
fair.
what you see here, what you say here, when you leave here, leave it here. I did not talk about it outside of secure spaces. When I got back to my home base in Bremerhaven, I was put on 12 on, 12 off watch. I talked about it rather freely in the secure spaces. My wife didn't know what happened to me. I was not supposed to tell him when I was aboard this ship, but no one bothered to tell me I wasn't. When I first got aboard her, the petty officer of the deck was a longtime friend of mine, Ronnie Campbell. I said, Ronnie, I need to let Lois know where I'm at. I said, can you give me the address of the ship? Well, he gave me the FBO address. And I got a postcard, wrote it on, told my wife I'd be aboard her, don't know how long. I'll let you know sometime in the future. Dropped it in the mail. She'd received that card, knew I was aboard it. On the 9th of June, a dear friend of hers that lived across the street in Bremerhaven waved to her to come over. She went over and said, did you hear about that U.S. ship being attacked? I was, no. She said, yeah, the USS Liberty. My wife said, I think Bryce is aboard that ship. Well, that set a panic button. When I got back home, I was a mess. I had to borrow a uniform from one of the Marines aboard the Carrier America. There happened to be a African-American Marine, same build that I was, real gentleman, same rank as I was, loaned me a khaki uniform. Well, I had to wear that uniform the next 5 days. And part of that was when I got back to the ship, that oil was everywhere. Everywhere you went, you get drops of that oil all over you. So I stunk from that. I had fever blisters in my face, and this yellowish pus was oozing out, dripping over the front of me. The morning I got back, couldn't get in the apartment, second floor apartment. The neighbor, Betty Bry, came to the door. Said, oh, Bry, said, Lois went out to the base to get the mail. Said, come on in, I'll get you a cup of coffee. She set me around behind the door, gave me a cup of coffee. A while later, she said, oh, here she is now. Well, she just got in the mail, and she'd just gotten a letter from her mother that her grandfather passed away. My wife didn't get along very well with her mother, but she was her grandfather's pride and joy. She's all broken up about that. Betty says, Lois, you need to come in here. The 3 kids are there. See, Marcia, our oldest one, was 6. Dorothy was 4. John was 3. And I was the ugliest mess, stunk to high heavens. Kids are screaming, my wife crying. The Marine commander calls me to his office the next day and says, best thing for you to do to forget about this is go to work. Put me on 12 hours on, 12 hours off, watch standing. I had to go to the doctor on my time off, get my wounds taken care of. The Navy sent a JAG officer, a lieutenant commander, all the way from Washington with a sheaf of papers for me to sign. He never bothered to tell me personally, you are not to talk about this. I talked about it freely in the secure spaces because these fellows, many of them had been aboard the Liberty or ships of her class doing the same task. If they weren't, they would be in the near future, likelihood. So they all were aware of it. So I talked freely about it, but I did not tell my wife anything. She had no idea what was wrong with me. I'd wake up screaming and crying, and she had no idea. And it wasn't until I think it was January of 1981. I was in Bible college in Springfield, Missouri. Class was broken up over the Christmas holidays, I'm sitting in homiletics class, waiting for the class to start on Monday morning. And one of my classmates comes in. He says, Bryce, were you aboard a ship was torpedoed? I said, how did you know about that? Well, he had been in Texas over Christmas holiday. He was on his way back late in the evening, listening to National Public Radio program used to run called Radio Reader. They were reading a book by James M. Ennis Jr., Assault on the Liberty. And it was on page 86, the narration about what I had done that day. And my name was there. And it wasn't until, I think, the following year, I'd taken a position as assistant pastor at a church in Key West. And the city library librarian was a member of the church. And I asked her if she had a copy of that book. She said, yeah, but there's a 6 months long waiting list for us. Well, put me on the list. When it became available, I immediately wrote a letter to Random House Publishers and said I'd like to get a hold of the author, James Ennis. They said, well, we can't give you his information, but we'll forward your letter to him. Just a few days after that, I got a thick packet of mail from Mr. Ennis. Had copies of the ship had a newsletter that they put out and mailed to all the crew, but they didn't know where I was until then. Back issues and a list of survivors, their contact information. I immediately started calling the crew, but it wasn't until, I think, 1986, we had a reunion in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. That was the first one that I went to. There was a library in Grafton, Wisconsin, about 30 miles north of Milwaukee. The town had built a new high school. The old high school was an old building that roughly a century old, but perfectly serviceable. And the town wanted to make that a public library. So they had a committee to raise funds. There are a couple of industrial donors, the Grove Brothers. Ted Group was one of them, gave a 6-figure donation. Mind you, 40 years ago was pretty high sum of money. So the committee said, well, we'll give you the privilege of naming the library. And he said, well, I'd like that to be named the USS Liberty Memorial Library. Well, during World War II, not far from Grafton, Wisconsin, was a Nazi youth camp. Can you imagine what that implied for the Jewish population of the city of Milwaukee? That raised a firestorm. But it went forward, and to the best of my knowledge, there was no violence. Well, and to this day, it's still the USS Liberty.
So but that was 19 years after the attack, and I remember 1986, 7. That at that time, the consensus was that this was an accident. Like if you learned about the USS Liberty at school, which you probably didn't, but if you did, you would be taught that this was a case of mistaken identity, that the Israelis thought it was an Egyptian ship.
Well, I suppose you could claim that the Israeli pilots were colorblind. The Egyptian ships are painted black and ours are painted gray. You can't jam destruction frequencies by accident. You must know your target. So that falls by the wayside. The machine gunning of the life rafts, that's pretty obvious. That's a violation of accepted law.
How did it make you feel as a survivor of the attack to hear people dismiss it as a case of mistaken identity?
Well, at that time, I had a small trucking company, and it was you pretty well had to work around the clock. If I had a grain hauling business, 2 trucks, 3 trailers. When I wasn't booking loads, I was hauling loads. If I wasn't booking or hauling loads, I was under it, changing the oil or fixing this or fixing that. I barely had time to think. it really wasn't till sometime after that where I happened to get a job with a union company, had a little more income coming in. We were able to attend a reunion in Washington, D.C., and that's where I began to really find out about what all had taken place. That was later in the 1980s, early 1990s.
And what did you find out?
I didn't know the names of any fellows that I pulled out or was credited with saving their lives. Joe Lentini, even though I kept him from drowning, I didn't actually get him out of there. And Dave McFagan, it was not until 1997, a reunion in 1997, I found out who that was. It was pretty ironic. He was in the hospital at Naples, Italy. He'd taken some shrapnel in his privates. Doctors told him he'd probably never have any more children. Well, he did have. He had a boy and a girl. At that reunion, one of the other fellows that I thought that I had brought out of there was Harold Six, Gene Six. Gene was his nickname. And he and I were having a beer, kind of joking around, and someone else came in. The tub in the bathroom was full of ice water and beer. We were in there yakking, and someone came in and said, "Hey, Sarge, there's another guy here who saved his life." Really? Went out into the other room, and there's Dave McFagan in a wheelchair with his daughter, born later after the attack. Was him in a wheelchair.
Now, the anniversary, the 59th anniversary of the attack on the Liberty was just the other day, within the last week, and it was a topic that was discussed in public, and you heard people defend the Israeli government by saying they didn't know it was an American ship, and anyone who says otherwise is an anti-Semite, hates Jews. How would you respond to that?
Anyone who knows anything about international recognition of ships at sea would conclude differently, would have to conclude differently. It's very obvious that it was a deliberate attack. Dave Lewis, prior to his death, was giving an interview, and he said, if it was an attack, it was the best planned attack in military. The ammunition that they were using, targets that they were doing, heat-seeking missiles designed to knock out all of our heavy transmitting antennas. It had to all be planned in advance. The upshot, in my opinion, the whole thing, Israel is grabbing Palestinian lands. Gaza Strip in total rubble. 70,000 documented killed, probably twice that many buried in the rubble that could never be recovered from the time it's elapsed. United States supplying the bombs. Israel invading their neighbors to the north, Lebanon. There are 1 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip homeless as a result of Israel's actions. Lebanon, southern Lebanon, whole towns destroyed and leveled. 1 million Lebanese refugees without a home. Where is the humanity? Should that be on the conscience of every American that we're supplying the bombs? That we're supplying Israel with $3.8 billion a year in foreign aid? Shouldn't that shake our conscience?
Well, if our leaders were able to ignore an attack on an American vessel, the Liberty, almost 60 years ago, clearly this is not a normal relationship between the United States and Israel. What country ignores an attack on its own navy?
Tucker, in 2005, Stephen Rosen, who was then a senior official with the American-Israeli Political Affairs Committee, was dining with Jeffrey Goldberg. At that time, he was with the New Yorker magazine. I believe he's with Atlantic magazine now. He said to Jeffrey, "You see this napkin, in 24 hours, I can have the signature of 70 senators on this napkin." Does that tell you something about who runs America?
How does that make you feel as someone who was wounded in the service of the U.S. military, in the service of the United States?
Disgusted.
Yeah. Why
I
are
have
you
to hand it
speaking
to
about
Thomas
this now?
Massey.
Yes.
His political career was over. The president and his political affairs supporters literally threw millions of dollars at Thomas Massey's primary campaign and got him pitched off the ballot. And Congressman Massey stuck his neck out by speaking publicly from the floor of the United States Congress. There were roughly 15, perhaps 17 of us survivors that were there, family members, sitting in the gallery when he gave his 5+ minute speech on the USS Liberty, urging the Congress to take action. Article 1, Section 8, U.S. Constitution, to, it's not exact wording, investigate acts of piracy on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations. And Congress has ignored that for the past 59 years. Now here, Thomas Massey sticks his neck out. The gentleman took us all to lunch afterwards at the Bull Feather restaurant there in Washington. I think that name is rather ironic. Bullshit, Bull Feathers. Treated us to lunch, personally met each one of us. While we were there, that day's Speaker Pro Tem of the Congress, Darrell Issa, came in, personally shook hands with every crew member, introduced himself around, made a few jokes about that jarhead that was aboard her. Another congressman also came in, Congressman McGuire, same thing, introduced themselves around. It left me with a wonderful feeling. Perhaps something can be done after 59 years to wake Congress up to their obligation to humanity, to do the right thing.
What would you like to see Congress do?
An open investigation. Well, some of us are still alive to testify. Let all the dirty laundry hang out there. If there are charges to be charged, bring them forward. Just air it out and let the American people, the world's public at large, make up their own when they see the facts laid bare. It's the same thing with the Epstein files. Hiding them. Let it hang out. Let us all look at it. If someone's guilty, fine, charge them. Sure, there's going to be some big time names. Sure, there's going to be some billionaires involved. I'm just a little guy. I'm not even a millionaire. Fine, come get me.
Do you think that'll happen?
I don't know. Don't care.
Well, I'm grateful you did this interview, Mr. Lockwood. And
Tucker, this is such an honor.
It's an honor for me.
Ray McGillard's a rascal, by the way.
He's a good man. Thank you for telling your story, and I hope the Congress listens.
The chain of events is kind of screwed up. Tucker, just I couldn't recall names today. Just I'm pretty tired for one thing. Did that interview yesterday with Rick Sanchez. Did an interview the day before yesterday with Pedro Gatos. KOOP Radio, Austin, Texas. By the way, he said to tell you, my audience is a lot bigger than his.
He's probably right. That's amazing. How was Rick Sanchez?
Oh, he was such a gentleman.
He is a nice man. Yeah.
He said you were friends, longtime friends.
I've known him a long time. A long time. Oh, well, I hope this brings shame to the people who are denying it. I really do.
It should. I'm not sure how effective I was, but
you were very effective, and your recall is unbelievable. Are you still preaching?
No, I haven't preached in 40 years. Preaching doesn't pay very well when you're honest.
No. And you have a daughter called Dorothy?
Yes.
I have a daughter called Dorothy.
She goes by Dee. She worked her way through Missouri State University as a speech pathologist. She waitressed in Red Lobster in Springfield, and she got a little tired of folks asking where Toto was. Started calling herself B. She has a garden gift shop in Knoxville, Tennessee. Tucker, you know you're old when your kids are all retired?
Yeah. Yes, that is true. Are your kids really retired?
Yes, they are. My youngest is 62. He medically retired. He had a terrible accident when he was in the Air Force. My oldest daughter, Marcia, has a doctorate in gifted children. She retired 3 years ago, I think. 30 years, public school teacher, gifted children, middle school, Washington Irving Middle School.
And just like that, we arrive at the final breaths of this week's broadcast. The slow dimming of a lantern, the quiet settling of truth after an hour that asked much of the heart. As you step back into your day, may you carry with you the questions that refuse to be buried, the courage that refuses to fade, and the curiosity that keeps truth alive in a world that works tirelessly to silence it. I'm Arlene Russell, your host and narrator. Sharing this hour with you has been an honor, an hour grounded in clarity, in dignity, in a solidarity that does not evaporate when the headlines shift or when the cameras turn away. If something you heard today unsettled you, challenged you, or cracked open a door you didn't know existed, and if you ever feel the pull to lend your own voice to this work, know that this space will always have room for you. You can reach us anytime at twippodcasts@gmail.com. To you, our listeners, thank you. Thank you for your time, your trust, your willingness to walk this difficult path beside us. Your presence is the quiet proof that truth still matters, that memory still matters, that resistance still matters. If you missed any part of today's program, you can find us on every major platform: YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Podcast Index, iHeartRadio, Pocket Casts, Deezer, Overcast, Castro, Podchaser, Castbox, Player FM, Good Pods, and True Fans. You can also explore our full archive on radio4all.net and archive.org. Just search This Week in Palestine, or TWIP, and look for the image of the little girl raising her hands in the victory sign. We're also featured on Million Podcasts, a platform uplifting Arab American creators and helping listeners discover new voices. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. We'll return next week. Until then, take care, stay grounded, stay steadfast. This is This Week in Palestine. This is occupied land. This is Palestine. And the call for freedom continues. Free Palestine from the river to the sea.